You could walk right past him and never know. He didn't wear gold chains, didn't bark orders, didn't lean on loud men or flashy cars. He didn't need to. Raymond Patriarca wasn't born dangerous. He became that way, slowly, like rust eating through metal, quietly, like rot under the floorboards. He came into this world on a cold March morning in 1908, just outside of Worcester, Massachusetts. His father, an immigrant shoemaker, worked with his head down, hammering leather till his knuckles split. His mother, silent and bitter from a life of sacrifice, taught Raymond one lesson early. Don't be the loudest man in the room. Be the one they're scared to interrupt. By the time he was 10, Raymond had already learned to disappear in plain sight. He'd sit in corners, eyes steady, never fidgeting. Grown men forgot he was there. That was his gift. He watched everything. He remembered everything. And he said nothing. The streets weren't kind back then. Italian kids were still guineas and wops to the men in suits and the blue coats. Irish boys ruled the corners. Cops took bribes in the open. And men who wanted to feed their families did what they had to, legal or not. By 16, Raymond had already tasted blood. Not the kind from movies, not loud shootouts or slick back alley knife fights. No, his first real crime was simple. A man who owed his uncle money got brave with his mouth. Raymond didn't say a word, just picked up a brick and dropped the man where he stood. Not dead, just enough damage to leave a message. He walked away. No panic, no running. That night, his uncle poured him a drink and said, "You don't got to raise your voice, Ray. Just raise your hand once and make it count." That became the code. Providence was where he built his kingdom, but it started in the whispers of Worcester, in those crowded immigrant houses where everyone had secrets and no one trusted the cops. In his early 20s, Raymond got into the rackets, not like the street thugs. He wasn't about wild moves or fast women. He picked his mentors wisely, men who dressed plain, men who ran numbers out of bakeries and made book-behind meat shops, men who didn't need anyone to know their names. He learned how money moved, not just from hand to hand, but through fear, respect, silence. He learned to control not just men's debts, but their families, their routines, their weaknesses. By the time the 1930s rolled in, Raymond wasn't playing small games anymore. He had 3 businesses on paper, none of which made a dime, but the money kept flowing. Loan sharking, hijacking, illegal betting, some light union muscle when needed. He kept a small crew, all loyal, all careful. Men who knew not to speak his name in public and never answered questions unless it was from Ray himself. What made him different was patience. While others rushed for power, Raymond waited. He played long. He watched as bosses rose fast and fell faster. Gunned down at bars, caught on wiretaps, sold out by mistresses. He didn't chase headlines. He chased leverage. And people gave it to him, slowly, unknowingly, just by being sloppy, loud, or greedy. At night, Raymond slept like a priest. Calm, light breathing. But if you could peel back his dreams, you'd find ledgers, blackmail, cold eyes, and the dull weight of a .38 snub nose. Because men like him didn't dream of beaches or love. They dreamed of order and the price they'd pay to keep it. You don't take a city like Providence by storm. You don't show up with guns, flashy suits, or wild threats. No, a place like Providence bends for the quiet man. The man who shows up, nods once, and makes you feel like saying no would cost you something you didn't even know you had. Raymond Patriarca didn't take Providence. He let it give itself to him. In the 1940s, Providence wasn't ready for what was coming. The city was a strange mix of old-world loyalty and American hunger. It had blue-collar roots, immigrant blood, and politicians who smiled wide while stealing with both hands. It was a city that understood secrets, but even secrets need someone to keep them. Raymond arrived at just the right time. He moved there officially in 1950, but his presence was already felt long before his feet touched Federal Hill. Guys who knew the streets whispered about a man from Worcester. A guy who didn't talk much but got things done. A guy who could shake hands with a priest in the morning and have a man's kneecaps busted by lunch. He set up his base on Atwell's Avenue, a little office inside a coin-operated vending machine business. It was almost laughable how ordinary it looked. A dull gray building with a chipped green door, old blinds, and a bell that rang when you opened it. But once you stepped inside, the temperature changed. You weren't in a business anymore. You were in a world where your next breath depended on how you stood, what you said, and who sent you. Raymond sat behind a battered oak desk. No pictures on the walls, no personal touches. Just a stack of ledgers, a small pistol in the top drawer, and a heavy silence that swallowed the room. His crew didn't hang around like goons. No loud music, no laughing in the back rooms. You didn't loiter near Raymond. You came in, said what needed to be said, and left. If you didn't get called in, you didn't go in. That was how it started. The local outfits, they either adjusted or disappeared. The old bosses in Providence had gotten sloppy, fat from easy money, lazy from decades of control. They didn't see Raymond coming because he didn't make noise when he walked. One by one, they got visits. Not threats, not violence, just conversations. You've been running this number racket a long time. I respect that. You keep 50%, send the other half here every week. You'll never have to look over your shoulder. And most of them agreed, not because they were scared, because they felt it. That thing behind Raymond's words. Like shaking hands with a man who never blinked. The ones who didn't agree? Well, Providence is full of rivers, and sometimes men fall in. Raymond's real power didn't come from violence, though. It came from understanding people. He knew how to read a man in seconds, what made him tick, what made him afraid, what he cared about, his wife, his kid, his image, and how to use it against him without ever raising his voice. He also knew who to trust and who needed to be watched. He kept his crew tight, never more than he needed. He didn't care about soldiers with big muscles or sharp suits. He looked for three things: loyalty, silence, patience. One of his men, an older guy named Frank, once said, "Raymond doesn't trust anyone who talks too fast or smiles too wide. If your shoes are too clean, he'll wonder what kind of dirt you're hiding." And that was the truth. The feds started watching him around 51. They knew he was the boss by then. They just couldn't prove it. Because Raymond didn't sign things. He didn't talk on phones. He didn't write anything down. He gave nods. He gave looks. And if you weren't part of it, you'd never know a murder had just been ordered with a raised eyebrow and a flick of the wrist. They tapped his phones anyway, put agents outside the vending machine office, followed his car to the dry cleaner, the church, the bakery. Nothing. Every time they thought they had something, it slipped through their fingers. Because Raymond had mastered the art of normal. He looked like someone's uncle, someone's neighbor. He dressed simple, ate simple, walked slow. He was invisible, and that made him invincible. But he wasn't soft. Men made that mistake more than once. There was this kid, late 20s, real ambitious type. He ran one of the gambling spots over on Broad Street, started pocketing extra cash, lied to the collectors, thought he was too small to notice. Raymond found out. He called the kid in, didn't yell, didn't threaten, just sat there behind the desk and said, "You want to run a business? Run it clean. You want to steal? Do it from someone else." The kid tried to talk back, said it was a mistake, miscount, sloppy records. Raymond just watched him, calm, still. Then he looked at one of his men and said, "Take him home. Make sure he doesn't open another book next morning." The kid's store was boarded up. By the end of the week, his name was off the books, and no one dared ask where he went. See, that was Raymond's style, quiet consequences. He didn't make examples, he made ghosts. People didn't fear him because of what he said. They feared him because of what was never said, what happened quietly, behind closed doors, to people who made the wrong move. But it wasn't just fear that built his empire. It was order. Providence under Raymond wasn't chaos. It was structured, disciplined. If you paid your dues, followed the rules, and kept your mouth shut, you made money, you fed your family, you stayed alive. He hated disloyalty more than anything, even more than cops. He once told a bookmaker who was thinking about flipping, "The government's just doing its job. You made a promise. That's different." And the way he said it, low, slow, almost sad, you knew that man wasn't going to make it past Sunday. By the mid-50s, Raymond wasn't just a local boss. He was a kingmaker. He had judges in his pocket, cops who looked the other way, politicians who owed their careers to his donations or his threats, unions too. He understood early that labor meant power. If you controlled the men who moved the cargo, cleaned the buildings, built the roads, you controlled the flow of the city. Money, movement, influence. So Raymond moved in, put his men inside the unions, quietly. No big takeover, no gunfights, just meetings, handshakes, donations. And soon, no truck left the docks without Raymond's say-so. But the bigger the empire, the heavier the crown. And Raymond wasn't getting younger. He had a heart problem. Years of stress, long nights, bad food, maybe even the guilt, if he ever felt it. He started getting checkups from a private doctor, the kind of man who made house calls and kept no records. But Raymond didn't complain. He still showed up every day, still sat behind that same desk, still listened more than he spoke. Some days he wouldn't say a word to anyone until noon, just watched the street from behind his blinds, watched the city breathe. Men wondered what went through his mind. Did he think about the people he'd stepped over, the friends who'd vanished, the ones who betrayed him and ended up in trunks or rivers? Or did he just count the money and keep moving? No one knew. Because Raymond Patriarca was a man made of shadows. He didn't share. He didn't explain. He just existed, like a statue built from fear, loyalty, and silence. At night, the vending machine business would close. The blinds would come down. The street would quiet. Raymond would leave alone. No motorcade, no bodyguards. He'd walk to his car, drive to his house on the east side, eat dinner in silence, maybe watch the news, maybe not. And then he'd sit, sometimes for hours, just staring out the window like he was waiting for something he knew would never come. In a world full of noise, Raymond Patriarca ruled by quiet. Not because he was soft, but because he understood the weight of his name. He knew that power wasn't in how loud you shouted. It was in how silent the room got when you entered, and in Providence, when Raymond spoke. The whole city held its breath. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It hums low and tight, like the moment before a storm breaks open. That was the silence around Raymond in the early 1960s. He wasn't just a boss anymore. He wasn't just Providence. He was New England now. Boston to Bridgeport, Hartford to Worcester, even into Fall River, Lowell, and Springfield. His reach touched all of it. But growth like that always carries a cost. The more men you feed, the hungrier they get. And the more enemies you silence, the louder the law starts whispering your name. The FBI had gotten smarter. They stopped chasing his soldiers, started chasing his structure. They sent undercover agents into the unions, started flipping mid-level earners, guys with gambling debts, cheating wives, drug problems, weak links, the kind of men Raymond hated. He called them cracks in the concrete. He always said, the feds don't need to break the wall. They just need to find one loose brick. And for the first time in years, one of those bricks crumbled. It started with a numbers runner out of Cranston, a guy named Louis, twitchy, nervous, the kind of man who said, sorry before every sentence. He got picked up with a duffel bag full of cash and a list of names. Instead of doing time, Louis folded. He gave them names, routes, meeting spots. Nothing that could take Raymond down, not directly, but enough to set the feds on a new path. They started watching the vending machine office harder, tapped more phones, questioned more locals. Raymond didn't flinch. He just tightened the circle, cut off Louis's corner of the business, burned every ledger, moved money in different patterns, started using more face-to-face communication and fewer middlemen. Every Thursday, his most trusted men would show up one by one. Quiet knocks, small envelopes, few words. Business kept moving, but the storm kept building. Raymond knew it wasn't just about Louis. He could feel something else, a deeper shift, not just from the feds, from inside. A few younger guys were getting loud. They didn't grow up under the old rules. They wanted faster money, more visibility, less discipline. They talked too much, dressed too loud, started mixing in drugs, something Raymond never allowed. He saw the shift coming like a crack in a frozen pond, and that's when he made the call. Not the kind with phones, the kind that ends with a body in the trunk. There was a kid out of Pawtucket, went by Ricky. Smart mouth, big ego, flashy cars, bad coke habit. He started skimming from card games, then bragging about it in clubs. Raymond didn't raise his voice. He invited Ricky in, offered him coffee, talked for 20 minutes about family, loyalty, the old ways. Ricky nodded, smiled, played the part. Then Raymond leaned forward and said calmly, "If a man pisses in the well he drinks from, he deserves to be thirsty." Ricky didn't get it, not right away. But when he left, 2 men followed. By morning, his body was found behind a warehouse. No wallet, no teeth, just a message. The rules still applied. Word spread fast. Raymond didn't give warnings. He gave examples. He wasn't cruel for sport. He was cruel for order. Because if the younger guys thought they could test him, that he was just an old man behind a desk, they were wrong. He may not have pulled the trigger anymore, but the city still bled when he blinked. The heat kept rising. In 1963, a Senate committee came knocking. Organized crime hearings, national, televised, big spectacle. They called Raymond in. He showed up in a plain gray suit, no jewelry, hair slicked, face unreadable. He sat there, stone-faced, while senators threw questions like darts. Do you run the crime syndicate in New England? Are you affiliated with the Cosa Nostra? Have you ever ordered a killing? Raymond said the same words every time. I respectfully declined to answer on the grounds it may incriminate me. Over and over. Calm, steady. He didn't blink. The cameras didn't faze him. The press didn't rattle him. Afterwards, when reporters crowded around, all he said was, "I run a vending business. I'm a businessman." And then he walked away, smooth and slow, like he was stepping out of a church, not a federal courthouse. Behind the scenes, though, things weren't quiet. The feds couldn't pin him yet, but they kept closing in. More wiretaps, more pressure on his associates. Even his son, Raymond Jr., got caught in the swirl. Jr. wasn't like his father. He didn't have the silence. He drank too much, trusted the wrong people, talked too loosely. Raymond didn't disown him, but he didn't protect him either. He once said to one of his capos, "Blood don't make a man. Silence does." And that was that. Despite everything, Raymond held control. He had a structure built on discipline, loyalty, and fear. But cracks were forming, not just from the feds, from within. One of his closest men, a guy named Tony, started getting reckless, started meeting people behind Raymond's back, started talking to another family in New York. That's the kind of betrayal that doesn't come with yelling. That kind of betrayal ends quietly, with cement and cold water. But Raymond didn't react right away. He watched, waited, confirmed it 3 times. Then one night, Tony vanished just like that. No body, no questions, just an empty chair at the next meeting. And everyone understood. Raymond was still in charge. But power like his never lasts forever. Not in America. Not with the FBI breathing down your neck. Not when the men under you are younger, dumber, and more addicted to attention than tradition. Raymond could feel it. The world was getting louder, sloppier. Mobsters were turning into celebrities. Movies were being made, books being written. Even some of the guys on the inside were dreaming about fame, but not Raymond. He still sat in that gray office on Atwell's Avenue, still wore the same suits, still ate the same sandwich at lunch, still listened more than he spoke, because he knew something none of the young guys did. Power isn't noise, it's control. One night, a new guy, kid from Boston, came into the office, big mouth, nervous energy, thought he was funny. He tried to joke with Raymond, tried to talk fast, act familiar. Raymond didn't smile, he just looked at him and said, "And this isn't a comedy club. You want to live long, learn to listen." The kid shut up. 2 weeks later, he was gone. Not dead, just vanished. No one ever heard from him again. Some said he left town. Some said he went back to Boston. But the message was clear. Even in the chaos of a changing world, Raymond's rules still mattered. Then, in 1968, it finally hit. A full indictment. The FBI had connected just enough dots. Loan sharking, gambling, conspiracy to commit murder. Not for any single crime, but for being Raymond Patriarca. He got arrested, booked, mugshot taken. The photo didn't show fear, just a tired man with old eyes, sick of the circus. He went to trial. They brought witnesses, audio tapes, testimonies, but Raymond's machine was still working. Witnesses forgot things, tapes were fuzzy, and jurors felt that strange pressure in their chest, the kind that made them look over their shoulders on the walk home. He was convicted, but only on lesser charges. He served time. A few years behind bars, not in a cage like an animal, in a federal facility with privileges. But still, Raymond had finally been touched by the thing he avoided for decades, the law. When he got out, he didn't come back swinging. He came back quiet, moved slower, spoke even less. The power was still there, but dimmer now, like a candle that still burns, but only because the room is so dark. His health was failing. His crew was aging. The world was shifting. But he still sat behind that desk, still opened the blinds every morning, still read the paper with a cup of black coffee. He watched the city move outside, watched the new men make noise, and he didn't say much. Because men like Raymond, they don't rage against the dying light. They just lean back in the chair, hands folded, and wait for the next knock at the door. There's a strange sound that follows power after its peak. It's not a bang, not a scream. It's quieter, slower, like wind through the cracks of an empty room. That's how it felt in Providence by the early 1970s. Raymond Patriarca was still alive, still technically the boss. But something had shifted, and no one wanted to say it out loud. He was old now, not frail, not weak, just slower. And in this business, slower means vulnerable. His heartbeat wasn't reliable anymore. He'd suffered his first real heart attack in '71, collapsed in his home. His housekeeper called the doctor before she called anyone else, just like he'd told her. He survived. Of course he did. He was too stubborn to die like that. But something inside him didn't come back with him from the hospital. He didn't visit the office as much. When he did, he moved like he was walking through water. Eyes still sharp, but quieter now, like the world was speaking a language he no longer respected. The younger guys were louder than ever. Cocaine had spread like wildfire. Guns were easier to get, and the men weren't built like the ones Raymond trained. They didn't understand silence, didn't respect boundaries. They thought respect was something you bought, not something you earned by surviving. He started grooming a successor, not because he wanted to retire, but because he knew the walls were closing in. He picked a man named Jerry, loyal, soft-spoken, disciplined. He reminded Raymond of himself, not flashy, not loud, just efficient, brutal when necessary, smart enough to wait. Jerry started handling collections, ran sit-downs, represented Raymond at meetings with New York, but not everyone approved. Some of the older capos saw it as weakness. Whispers grew, questions, doubt, and doubt in Raymond's world is more dangerous than a bullet. One evening, in the back room of a restaurant on Federal Hill, one of the old guard made a mistake. He leaned in too close to Jerry and said, "Back in the day, men had to earn their stripes. Now they just get handed keys to the kingdom." Jerry smiled politely, said nothing. The next morning, Raymond summoned that capo to the vending office. There were no threats, no yelling, just a chair across from the desk and Raymond's eyes. He said, "I built this family with silence and blood. You want to question me? Go ahead, but do it like a man, not like a child whispering in the dark." The man didn't speak again, not in that office, not anywhere. A week later, he had a stroke on his fishing boat. At least that's what the paper said. The truth? He made the mistake of thinking Raymond's age meant softness. It didn't. It just meant the blade came slower, but just as deep. Despite the power plays, the structure was rotting. The FBI had switched strategies. They stopped chasing the top. They started breaking the middle. Mid-level earners, enforcers, drivers, one by one, they were flipped, turned into witnesses with promises of protection and light sentences. The government knew they couldn't kill Raymond directly. He was too insulated, too careful. So they infected his world like a virus, slowly collapsing his web from the inside out. Then came the tapes, hidden mics, bugged cars, meetings in restaurants that weren't as private as men thought. By 1975, the FBI had collected hours of conversation, enough to indict multiple members of the Patriarca family, not just on racketeering, but murder conspiracies, extortion, bribery, and union corruption. Raymond was implicated in everything, indirectly, of course. But everyone knew who the conductor was. He was arrested again. This time it felt different. He didn't speak to reporters, didn't offer the same cool grin. He just looked tired of the process, tired of the lies, tired of men who couldn't keep their mouths shut. He didn't see himself as a criminal. He saw himself as a man who'd brought order to chaos. He never sold drugs, never touched kids, never beat his wife. He kept the streets working, made sure the men he fed were disciplined. What did the government do? They taxed the poor, gave speeches, and shook hands with the same men they arrested a week later. Raymond saw hypocrisy everywhere, but he knew better than to fight it out loud. He played his role in court, stone-faced, calm, always silent when it counted. And once again, they couldn't touch him directly. He returned home, older now, slower, but still the king. Yet, even kings grow weary. He started spending more time in bed. Doctors came weekly. He read less, talked less. He still controlled the family, but through whispers now, through Jerry, through trusted messengers. He didn't sign off on every hit, didn't count every dollar. He delegated, but not out of laziness, out of realism. He knew his time was ending. Sometimes at night, he'd sit on the porch, cigar burning low, glass of whiskey untouched. He'd watch the street, same as always. But it wasn't the same anymore. The cars were faster, the music louder. The men on the corners didn't dress like soldiers. They dressed like punks. He once told a visitor, "We used to make money with brains. Now they do it with noise." He didn't smile when he said it, just flicked ash into the wind and stared down the street like he was waiting for something old to return. He didn't fear death. That wasn't his way. He just feared disorder. The thought that when he was gone, the world he built would fall apart. That the young guys would turn the family into a circus, drugs, snitches, wild shootings in public, dead kids, dead cops. He wanted control, even after the grave. So he called in Jerry one last time, told him the real structure, the off-book books, the blackmail files, the names of judges and city councilmen who still owed favors. he gave it all to Jerry. Not as a gift, but as a burden. He looked Jerry in the eye and said, "This isn't a crown. It's a curse. You wear it, or you burn with it." Jerry didn't argue. He nodded, stood, and left. A few months later, Raymond had another heart attack, worse than the last. This time, he didn't wake up for 3 days. When he did, he didn't speak. Just stared at the ceiling, eyes glassy, breathing shallow. The doctor told the family to prepare. Raymond held on. Of course he did. He wasn't going to die in a hospital bed under white lights and plastic tubes. That wasn't his way. He waited, held on. And one night, alone in his house with the city silent outside, he slipped away. No drama, no spectacle, just breath. And then none. The papers wrote headlines like, "Crime boss dies peacefully at 76. End of an era. Patriarca family don passes." But the streets? They didn't say much, because Raymond had taught them well. When a king dies, you don't shout it, you nod, you keep walking, and you don't look back. His funeral was private, no spectacle, no fireworks, a small church, a few quiet men in dark suits, no tears, just silence. The way he would have wanted it, because Raymond never needed people to cry for him. He needed them to remember. The city didn't crumble the next day. The family didn't explode. But things changed. Louder men stepped forward. Greed took over. Order turned to chaos, slow at first, then fast. Deals got sloppy. Snitches got brave. And blood spilled for reasons that would have once gotten you killed just for asking. But Raymond, he was gone. No memoir, no final words, no legacy written in gold, just silence. And in that silence, a name. Raymond L.S. Patriarca. The man who ruled a kingdom with a whisper and died, knowing that in the end, power doesn't disappear. It just forgets who it used to fear. You could almost hear the change in the air after Raymond died, not with a bang, not with screams, but with that same strange stillness that comes after a heavy rain, where everything looks familiar, but nothing feels safe anymore. His funeral was barely over when the cracks began to widen. On the outside, it looked like business as usual. Guys still showed up to collect envelopes, money still moved, shops still paid their tribute, and men still spoke Raymond's name like he might still be watching. But those closest to him knew better. They knew the lion was gone. And when the lion dies, the jackals always come running. Jerry was the successor, hand-picked. But that didn't mean he was safe. Raymond had told him it wasn't a crown, it was a curse, and Jerry was starting to understand just how right he was. Raymond's way was gone. His silence, his discipline, his fear, all that held the empire together had vanished the moment the old man took his last breath. And now, Jerry was the man in the chair. Only the room felt colder, the eyes around him sharper, and the rules different. The younger guys came first, the ones Raymond would have never let into the room. They didn't wear suits, they didn't shut their mouths. They came with loud cars, new drugs, and wild ideas. They didn't want control, they wanted cash. Fast, easy, loud. Guys with gold chains, big watches, and no understanding of what Raymond built. They didn't want to inherit the legacy. They wanted to gut it and sell the parts. Jerry tried to hold the line. He kept Raymond's old rules in place. No drugs, no public shootings, no disrespect to the old guard. But the world had changed. The rules didn't scare the new guys. The old codes felt like ghosts to them. And more importantly, Jerry wasn't Raymond. He didn't have that same presence. He was respected, sure. But he didn't have the kind of aura that silenced a room just by walking into it. And worse, he started slipping. The first mistake came with a deal out of Lowell. A low-level associate named Manny started pushing heroin behind Jerry's back. Sloppy, loud, and dangerous. Raymond would have had him killed before his second sale. But Jerry hesitated. He wanted to avoid the heat. He wanted to talk to Manny, figure it out. By the time he made a decision, Manny had already been picked up by the DEA and gave up 3 names in exchange for a lighter sentence. That was the first domino. By the end of the month, 2 more arrests. One of the old Union men flipped, and suddenly the FBI had a new case file titled Patriarca Family, Post-Raymond Structure. Jerry could feel it slipping, the respect, the fear, the control. Guys who used to sit quietly during meetings now challenged him. One of them, a young enforcer named Nick, even questioned him in front of others. It was at a sit-down over in Cranston. Nick raised his voice, said Jerry was stuck in the past, that Raymond's dead, and we're not priests. We're businessmen. Jerry didn't respond, not right away. He just sat there staring. Then finally, he stood, walked out of the room without a word. The next morning, Nick was gone, shot in the head, found in his car outside a strip club, slumped behind the wheel. It was a message, but instead of bringing silence, it brought questions, because Jerry wasn't Raymond. When Raymond made someone disappear, the city flinched. When Jerry did it, the city got curious. And curiosity is what kills you. The feds smelled blood. They didn't need to prove Jerry pulled the trigger. They just needed to prove he ordered it. They started flipping more guys, not capos, not yet, but drivers, runners, bookies. And the biggest threat wasn't what they knew, it was what they thought they knew. That's all the government needed. A whisper, a hunch, a half-truth. And Jerry was smart enough to know it. He started closing doors, pulled back on business, cut ties with unstable earners, started limiting who came to meetings. But the damage was done. Guys were scared, not of Jerry, of the uncertainty. No one trusted anyone. And in this life, when trust dies, bullets come next. Worse, New York started sniffing around. The commission, the heads of the 5 families, had always respected Raymond. He wasn't one of them, but he was an ally, a peer. But Jerry, they saw him as a liability, unstable, weak, losing control. Rumors started that one of the New York families, maybe the Genovese, was considering stepping in, maybe not to take over outright, but to stabilize the region. That word alone, stabilize, meant invasion. And Jerry knew it. He was holding a crumbling kingdom, and the vultures were circling. He turned inward, started trusting fewer people. Even some of the older guys, men who sat beside Raymond for decades, were left out of the loop. Some said Jerry got paranoid. Others said he got smart. But the end result was the same. The empire shrunk, not in money. Loyalty. The men who mattered stopped believing, they stopped fearing. And in this world, when a man doesn't fear you, he either leaves or he puts a bullet in your back. It came to a head in 1978. The feds made their move, a sweeping indictment, RICO charges, conspiracy, loan sharking, extortion, 2 murder counts. Jerry's name was on the front page, alongside 5 others, including one of the old capos who had once sat beside Raymond at Sunday dinner. That betrayal cut deep, but Jerry didn't fight it. He surrendered calmly, wore a cheap gray suit, kept his mouth shut, no press statement, no deals, just silence, like Raymond had taught him. He did time, 5 years inside, got out in the early 80s, older, colder, thinner, and when he returned, the city didn't welcome him back with open arms, because by then, the Patriarca family was no longer the Patriarca family. It was just a name, a fractured set of crews, some loyal to the old ways, some selling drugs, some working with the cops behind closed doors. The silence was gone. The order was dead, and Raymond's name was starting to fade from the lips of the street. Jerry stayed low. He knew better than to try and rebuild. The city wasn't his anymore. The young guys were in charge now. And they didn't want wisdom. They wanted profit. They didn't care about unions, didn't care about respect. They didn't even know the rules. They were dangerous because they were stupid. And stupid men with guns are worse than any cop. Jerry lived quietly after that, kept a small place in Johnston, walked his dog, read his paper, had groceries delivered. He wasn't looking over his shoulder anymore. Because he knew something the young guys didn't. This life doesn't end with gunfire. It ends with regret. Sometimes old friends would stop by. Not many. Just a handful of men who remembered the old days, the real days. They'd sit on the porch, share a drink, say nothing for long stretches of time. Then maybe one of them would ask, "You ever hear his voice in your sleep?" And Jerry would nod. Because some ghosts don't haunt. They watch. They wait for you to break the rules. And Raymond was always watching, even now. The real tragedy of men like Raymond Patriarca isn't how they lived. It's what happens after the fear fades, after the silence breaks, after the men who understood the weight of the game are replaced by kids who think it's all about money and muscle. Raymond built a kingdom with discipline and cold blood. He passed it down with warning and care, but in the end, no one could hold it. Because the crown didn't belong to a man, it belonged to a time. And time, no matter how feared you are, always moves on. Raymond had been dead for less than a decade when they started speaking his name like a punchline. In dark bars, in back rooms of pool halls, in drug houses filled with young bloods who didn't know better. They said things like, "He was old. School. He ran vending machines and bookie joints. Big deal. We're making real money now." They said it because they thought they were safe, because the man who enforced the silence was gone, because the rules that kept everyone in line had crumbled, not with a bang, but with whispers. Raymond never let his men talk to cops, never let them run heroin, never let them chase headlines or make enemies just to look tough. But now, everything he hated was thriving. The Patriarca family still had its name, still had bones, still had some reach in Providence and Boston, but it was no longer a family. It was a brand, and every two-bit thug wanted a piece of it. By the mid-1980s, the structure Raymond had left behind had mutated. It was split, not just between territories, but between philosophies. Half the men still followed the old-school code. No drugs, no witnesses, no publicity. Strict structure, quiet enforcement, loyalty before profit. The other half? They were in it for the flash. Coke money, gun deals, strip clubs, big mouths and bigger egos. These were the kind of men who quoted Scarface and wore snakeskin boots. The kind Raymond would have had shot before they even lit a cigar in his office. But they were loud. And in the absence of fear, loudness started to sound like power. One man in particular rose from the noise, a guy named Bobby Rossi. He was slick, ruthless, and charming enough to make small-time earners think he was the future. He started calling himself the new face of the family. And for a while, he looked the part. He dressed sharp, paid well, drove a Mercedes. He knew how to throw a party and run a crew. But what Bobby didn't understand, what none of the new guys understood, was that chaos wears nice shoes too. Behind the expensive suits and the coke-fueled meetings, Bobby was a liability. He brought in heat. He let amateurs into the business. He made enemies faster than he made money, and worse, he didn't believe in silence. He talked. A lot. The FBI loved Bobby. They didn't even have to try. His phones were bugged, his clubs were wired, and half the guys he surrounded himself with were already on someone's payroll, or wearing wires. Within months, the Bureau had more on Bobby than they ever had on Raymond in 40 years. And Bobby, in all his arrogance, thought he was invincible. Until one day, he wasn't. It happened fast. A raid on his apartment, his books seized, his girlfriend flipped within 48 hours. They offered Bobby a deal, 30 years on paper, unless he talked. And he did. He talked like a man on fire. Names, meetings, drop locations. People who hadn't been active in years were suddenly on the radar again. It was a massive betrayal, not just of the family, but of the code. Raymond had lived and died by one rule: never speak. Bobby spit on it in a week. The fallout was brutal. Within 6 months, 11 arrests. 2 men disappeared. One found in a dumpster behind a seafood joint in Warwick. The other never found at all. A capo named Frankie V took a plea deal. Another, Tony D, tried to hang himself in his cell. Failed. The rest? They scattered like rats in a fire. And just like that, the name Patriarca was in the news again. But not whispered in alleyways or spoken with reverence in courtrooms. Number. Now it was headlines and mugshots. Now it was jokes in late-night monologues. Now it was testimony in court transcripts. Some of the older men who'd survived Raymond's era, men who had shut up and done their time, couldn't believe it. One of them, a guy named Al, who used to run books in Pawtucket, said over a drink, "We used to bury guys for talking. Now they get book deals." He wasn't bitter. He was broken, because he knew what had been lost. Not the money, not the muscle, but the discipline. In 1989, the FBI formally declared the Patriarca crime family to be weakened, fractured, and compromised from within. That same year, Jerry, the man Raymond had once entrusted with the future, died in a nursing home in Cranston. No funeral, no flowers, no honor. He died with a small scar on his chest from a bypass surgery and a wallet that had $26 in it. They say he never cashed in the secrets he knew, that even when the family fell apart, he never spoke. He died like Raymond, quietly, but without the kingdom to show for it. And that was the story for a time. A great name, a great silence, and then the noise that swallowed it whole. But even in the wreckage, even in the rats and the headlines, Raymond's ghost lingered. In the corners of Providence, in the few quiet bars still untouched by neon, in the older men who sat with their backs to the wall and refused to speak a name they hadn't heard in 20 years. There was still something there. Not power, but memory. Then, in the early 90s, a young prosecutor out of Boston started pulling old cases. He found transcripts, sealed testimonies, forgotten warrants, and he saw a pattern. Every major criminal organization in New England between 1950 and 1970 had one thing in common. They were all afraid of one man. Not because he was loud, not because he was violent, but because he never made mistakes. The prosecutor's name doesn't matter. What matters is what he said in an interview years later. If Raymond had lived another 10 years, we wouldn't have had a shot. He kept the wolves in line. The minute he died, they turned on each other. That's the thing about real power. You only realize what it was after it's gone. In the end, the empire Raymond built didn't fall from bullets or betrayals. It withered, because no one knew how to hold it. Because silence is a language, and Raymond was fluent. The men who followed, they spoke noise, and the world chewed them up the way it always does men who confuse attention for strength. In an old shoebox found in a Providence. Safe house years later, someone found a photo, black and white, faded. Raymond sitting at a table, one hand on a coffee cup, the other on a ledger. No smile, no pose, just eyes, cold, focused. Behind him, a younger Jerry, half in frame, a phone on the wall, a calendar dated 1967. The agent who found it said he felt something weird holding it, like the photo could still watch you, like somewhere in that frame was a man who already knew how this would end. because Raymond Patriarca understood what the others didn't. Power isn't given, it's remembered, and when men forget, they die loud, just like he always knew they would. He sat alone most nights, back against the wall, watching the door without watching the door. You learn how to do that after enough years. Watch without looking, listen without reacting. It becomes instinct, muscle memory, like breathing but quieter. His name was Vincent Sarno, though no one called him that anymore. To the few who remembered, he was just Vince the Quiet. Not a flashy nickname, not meant to sound dangerous, but in the old days, when Raymond ran the city, being quiet wasn't an insult. It was a threat. Vince was never a boss, never wanted to be. He didn't crave attention, didn't throw parties, didn't run his mouth in clubs. He made his bones in 55 over a silent job, a collection gone wrong in Central Falls where a butcher refused to pay up. The other guy cracked a bat across Vince's ribs. Vince didn't scream, didn't yell. He just picked up the meat cleaver, swung once, and left the butcher's hand on the floor next to a box of lamb chops. Then he walked out. Didn't tell a soul. Raymond found out the next day, and by that afternoon, Vince was on payroll. No questions asked. For the next 20 years, Vince was what you'd call a shadow earner. He handled collections, ran clean books, and delivered envelope with no delay. Never flashy, never greedy. If you owed, he'd give you a chance. If you lied, he gave you a choice. If you stole, he gave you a grave. But always, always quiet. That's why Raymond trusted him. In a world full of men who wanted to be kings, Vince only wanted to be useful. When Raymond died, Vince didn't mourn like the others. He didn't cry, didn't give a speech. He just stood in the back of the church, hat in hand, and stared at the coffin like it owed him something. Because Vince knew what came next. He could feel it, like a draft slipping through an old doorframe. And when Jerry tried to hold it all together, Vince backed him. Not because he believed in Jerry, but because he believed in the order. But even order can't fight time. By the late 80s, Vince had all but retired, not officially. He still collected once in a while, still moved small numbers. But he was off the radar, because by then, the new breed had taken over. Guys with gold chains, drug money, and no sense of structure. Vince hated them, called them parrots with pistols. Loud, dumb, and ready to shoot the minute they heard someone smarter than them speak. He lived in a small apartment above a bar in East Providence, 1 bedroom, 1 old rotary phone, a fridge with beer and cold cuts. He kept a .38 in the sock drawer, a knife under the sink, and a pair of worn-out dress shoes next to the door, always pointed outward in case he needed to leave in a hurry. He had no family, no kids. The only photo in the place was of his mother, taken in 1943, before he ever put a hand on a man. He looked at it sometimes when he couldn't sleep, which was often. The world kept moving, but Vince didn't. He watched as the FBI took down crew after crew. He saw men he'd once called stand-up turn into witnesses overnight. Even guys from his era, guys who had survived real wars, started folding. In 1994, one of his old friends, Jimmy DeMarco, flipped on 2 capos in exchange for early release. Vince read it in the paper, didn't say a word, just poured a drink, lit a cigarette, and whispered to himself, "Better to rot in silence than to speak and walk." That was his truth. That was Raymond's code. And it wasn't up for negotiation. But codes don't keep you warm. They don't fix the ache in your knees or the emptiness in your living room. They just haunt you. And for Vince, the ghosts were getting louder. In 1996, he got a call. Landline, 2:12 a.m. Only a few people had the number. He answered like always, one word, "Yeah." The voice on the other end was shaky, young. Said his name was Tony Sarno, Vince's cousin's kid. Never met him, hadn't spoken to that side of the family in decades, but Tony was in trouble, said he needed help, said he heard Vince used to know people. Vince said nothing, waited. Tony kept talking. He owed money to a guy in Pawtucket, 15 grand. Said they threatened to break his legs or worse. Vince finally asked, "You run your mouth to them?" Tony said, "Maybe. I said I had family. You shouldn't have." Click. Vince didn't sleep that night. He hated family, not in theory, in reality. Because blood makes men stupid, and in his world, stupid gets you buried. But he also knew the name Sarno wasn't a common one. And if Tony got popped, people would come asking, not to mourn, but to leverage. And Vince didn't owe the kid, but he owed his own silence. The next morning, Vince put on the shoes by the door. Gray suit, no tie, hat tilted just right. He went down to the bar, got a coffee, sat at the window seat, waited. He wasn't meeting anyone. He just wanted the city to see him. Let the right eyes report back. Let them say, Vince the Quiet was on Atwell's this morning. Suit, hat, and everything. Because sometimes presence is a message. And Vince still knew how to send one. By noon, he had a name. Rico Paolini, the guy Tony owed. Used to be small time, did numbers in Woonsocket, now ran a side crew out of a strip mall parking lot. Pills, guns, junk loans. Loud business. Vince made one call, just one. Asked for a sit-down. No threats, no details. Rico agreed, mostly out of curiosity. They met at a diner off 195. Rico showed up with two guys, both carrying. Vince came alone, sat in the booth, didn't stand. Rico slid in across from him, smiled like an idiot. "Didn't think you were still breathing, Vince." Vince didn't smile back, just stared. Let the silence grow heavy, let the moment stretch. Then he said, "There's a kid. Tony Sarno. Runs his mouth. You got him by the balls," Rico laughed, said, "Yeah, kid's a dumbass. What about him?" "He doesn't owe you anymore." Silence. Rico squinted. "That a threat?" Vince tilted his head. "No, that's a statement." Another silence, longer this time. Rico looked at his guys, then back at Vince. "Old man, your time's done. We don't run things your way anymore." Vince leaned in just slightly. "That's true. But my way? My way still has reach. And memory. And bodies they never found." He stood slowly, dropped an envelope on the table. "Take the money. Consider the debt gone. If I hear the kid's name again, from anyone, I bury you without a shovel." No raised voice, no hand on a gun, just words. Cold. Measured. And then he left. Nothing happened after that. Not to Tony, not to Rico, but word spread. And for a few weeks, Providence remembered what fear used to feel like. Tony never called again, never even said thank you. Vince didn't expect him to. The kid was weak, a mirror of the new generation. They wanted shortcuts. They wanted respect without blood. But Vince knew the truth. In their world, the only respect that lasts is the kind bought with discipline. Not fear, not money, discipline. Vince died 2 years later, stroke in his sleep, quiet, like everything else. No obituary, no funeral, just a city that felt a little emptier the next morning. The bartender downstairs closed for a day, left a note on the door. Closed for a man who never raised his voice. And that was that. No statues for men like Vince, no headlines, no rewrites, just memory. Passed in whispers, held by the few men who still sit in the backs of rooms and say nothing unless it needs to be said. Raymond would have respected him, because in a world of rats and ghosts, Vince Sarno stayed clean. Not because he was holy, not because he was good, but because he remembered. By the turn of the millennium, Providence had changed. The streets still had names, the shops still had families, the old bars still had the same scratches on their booths. But something deeper had shifted. The fear was gone. Not fear of death, that still lived in every corner of the city, but the fear of consequence, the fear that someone was watching, the fear that stepping out of line meant a bullet in your mouth, not a plea deal in court. That fear had died the same day Raymond Patriarca's heart stopped. And now, 25 years later, the last men who lived by his rules were either dead, locked up, or praying not to be remembered. The FBI didn't kick in doors like they used to. They didn't need to. Now, they waited. Tapped your girlfriend's burner phone, got a coworker to wear a wire, listened for weeks before making a move. And when they came with dates, times, bank transfers, wire recordings, and names already printed on the indictment. You were already convicted before the cuffs even clicked. The last major move came in 2002. It started with a sting in Boston, a nothing case, on paper. One of the lower tier crews was moving pills through a used car lot, small time. But one of the arrested men flipped almost immediately. He wasn't made, wasn't even officially in the life, but he knew names, and he knew how to talk. Over the next 6 months, that one voice cracked open a box Raymond had tried to bury forever. Not because of what the kid knew, but because of who he led them to. A name that still mattered, still feared in hushed bars, still remembered in prison cafeterias and union halls. Dominic Dom Spano. Dom was the last active capo who had shaken Raymond's hand. He had started off as a runner in the 50s, worked under Vince the Quiet for a while, then got his own crew in 72. After Raymond's death, Dom kept his head down. He didn't chase power. He kept the numbers running, the gambling clean, the books tighter than a nun's jaw. He refused to touch drugs, never talked to cops, paid his lawyers in cash, and kept 3 separate exit plans, just in case. To the public, he was just another aging Italian with arthritis and a sharp wardrobe. To the life, he was the last real one, but even Dom had a blind spot, and that blind spot's name was Lenny Torrio. Lenny was mid-30s, smooth-talking, new computers, offshore accounts, encryption. He was Dom's bridge to the new world, helping him launder money through shell companies, hiding gambling transactions behind fake e-commerce stores, setting up fronts that looked like tech startups. Dom thought he was smart, but Lenny was wired. The FBI had flipped Lenny a year earlier on a credit card scam. In exchange for immunity, he gave them full access to everything: his emails, his calls, his drop locations, even his phone's GPS tracking, which logged Dom's every movement. Dom was old school. He didn't trust phones, but he trusted Lenny. And that trust was the beginning of the end. In May 2003, Dom was arrested outside a bakery he had owned since 1984. It was raining that day. He didn't resist, didn't ask questions, just looked at the agents calm as ever and said, "You boys hungry?" Bread still hot inside. They didn't laugh. Dom didn't care. The indictment was a masterpiece, 41 pages long. Charges: racketeering, money laundering, illegal gambling, conspiracy, tax fraud, witness tampering. They had tapes, they had emails, they had Lenny. And worst of all, they had context. They knew Dom wasn't just another old man. He was a link to a criminal era that the government had spent half a century trying to bury. So they went for the throat. The trial began in late 2004. It was federal. No cameras, no deals. The prosecutor called it a symbolic cleansing, the final nail in the coffin of the Patriarca crime family. But Dom, he didn't flinch. He showed up every day in the same gray suit, took notes, listened, smirked when they played the tapes. One of the transcripts had Lenny asking him about the newer guys using guns too loosely. Dom replied, "You give kids bullets, and they think they're wise. But give me 5 minutes and a name, and I'll make his mother forget he ever existed." The courtroom went still when that was read aloud, because that wasn't bluster. That was truth, spoken by a man who had earned silence the hard way. During closing arguments, the prosecutor called Dom a ghost of a dead world, said he was the last whisper in a house that used to echo with screams. Dom didn't blink. And when it was his turn to speak, he declined. Just like Raymond used to, the verdict came down in December. Guilty on all counts. Sentence 35 years, no parole. Dom was 71. He didn't appeal, didn't write a letter, didn't call any reporters, didn't weep in court. He just nodded and walked out in cuffs, one slow step at a time, like a man who had already buried the world he came from and was ready to join it. He died in 2011. Heart failure. Federal prison hospital in North Carolina. No family at his side. No last rites. They cremated him quietly. A guard said his last words were, "Tell him I never talked." With Dom gone, the final thread snapped. There were no more bosses, no more sit-downs, no more weekly envelopes passed under diner tables. The Patriarca name still got tossed around in press articles, usually alongside words like former, dismantled, or defunct. But there was no structure left, just echoes. The men who remained, the few still breathing, lived small. Retirement homes, desert towns, social security checks, once feared men now feeding pigeons and watching reruns. Not because they wanted to fade quietly, but because they understood something the new generation never did. The life doesn't end in a blaze. It ends in a courtroom with a wire on your best man, and your last memory being a judge, reading your sins back to you in front of strangers. And what about Lenny? He got witness protection, moved to Arizona, started a new life with a fake name and a clean record. But in 2013, he was found dead in his apartment, single gunshot, back of the head, no suspects, no signs of struggle. FBI called it a suicide. Locals whispered something else, because somewhere, someone still remembered the code. And one final debt got paid. In the end, Raymond was right. He always said, you can't teach silence to men raised by noise. And that's what killed the family. Not the feds, not the rats, not the trials, the noise. The thirst for the headlines, the hunger for shortcuts, the belief that respect could be taken instead of earned. Today, there's barely a trace left. A few cracked sidewalks on Atwells Avenue, a boarded-up vending office, a plaque somewhere with a name scratched out. But the city remembers. Not in words, not in statues, in the way the old men still sit with their backs to the wall, in the way some names are still only spoken once, in the long, haunted pause that still follows the word Raymond. FBI Internal Memorandum, subject, former UC report, Raymond L.S. Patriarca, author, agent, Aureus Laker, retired. Date, April 11th, 2006. Classification, previously confidential, now declassified. There are men you investigate, men you build cases against, men who lie, who bluff, who scream, who panic. And then there are men like Raymond Patriarca. You don't investigate Raymond. You orbit him, you wait, you watch. And in the end, if you're lucky, you leave before he notices you've been watching. Because once he sees you, he never stops. I was assigned to New England in 1969. Fresh from Quantico, sharp suit, high ideals, fresh nerves. The Bureau had already been circling Raymond for over a decade. Wiretaps, surveillance, informants. They had everything but the one thing they needed, his voice. No direct orders, no clear links, just trails of men with broken faces and missing fingers, and whispers that ended in silence. I was told, get close, earn trust, stay alive. What I wasn't told was that I'd spend the next 2 years trying to understand a man who didn't blink, didn't boast, and didn't seem to fear anything, except chaos. I first met him inside that damn vending machine office. Place looked like it belonged to a man selling used tires, not running an empire. Gray blinds, chipped desk, Paper-thin carpet, no pictures, no trophies, just Raymond sitting there with a cup of black coffee and a ledger I was never allowed to see. He didn't look up when I walked in, didn't offer a hand, didn't ask my name. He just said, "If you're gonna lie, lie slow." I don't like fast talkers. That was my introduction. I wasn't undercover in the usual way. I wasn't pretending to be mafia. I was a low-level fixer, a guy who knew people, brought in by someone Raymond tolerated, not trusted. But somehow, I visited the office once a week, sat across from him. Sometimes we talked about the weather, other times about the city, the papers, sports. Never business, never names. But everything meant something. When he talked about the Sox bullpen, he was testing how I handled pressure. When he mentioned a bakery closing, he was watching if I knew why, or if I was too far outside. He was always measuring, always calculating. And if he liked your answer, he didn't smile. He just didn't dismiss you. I saw men sweat in front of him, men with guns in their belts, killers, earners, soldiers. He'd stare at them, silent, maybe tilt his head, maybe shift in his chair. And grown men would fold like lawn chairs. Because Raymond didn't command fear with violence. He did it with presence. It was like standing next to a silent storm. You didn't know when it would break, but you knew it could. And that was enough. There was one afternoon I remember clear as glass. It was summer, hot. Office smelled like sweat and coffee. I'd brought in some fake intel, a made-up story about a potential problem in Cranston, something minor, just to see what he'd do. Raymond listened, nodded, then said, "Let me tell you something about problems, kid. The loud ones solve themselves. It's the quiet ones that rot through your floorboards while you're looking at the door." Then he sipped his coffee, and that was that. I left, heart pounding, because in that moment I knew. He knew I was lying. But he didn't say anything, didn't call me out, didn't have me followed, didn't tell me to leave. He just filed it away. That was worse, because now I was on his list. And if I slipped again? I wasn't walking back out. Later that year we got a break. One of Raymond's collectors, a guy named Sal, got picked up in Connecticut. Sal was nervous, spilled a few names. Nothing that directly tied Raymond, but enough to warrant a deeper push. The Bureau wanted me to provoke him, get him agitated, get him talking. So I did something reckless, something I regret. I tried to corner him, told him a certain man had flipped, told him he needed to act or the whole thing would collapse. He looked at me, not angry, not scared, just still. Then he leaned forward and said, "You ever seen a man bleed out slow, Agent?" He said, "Agent, not guy, not kid. Agent." Just like that, the room changed. He never said my full name, never pointed a finger. But he knew, and he wanted me to know that he knew. And he wanted me to know that he let me sit in that chair every week anyway. Because to Raymond Patriarca, the game wasn't about killing you. It was about making you live with the fear of being allowed to live. I was pulled from the assignment 3 weeks later. Official reason was rotation. Unofficial reason. They didn't want to explain another body in a dumpster to the director. I left New England quietly, took a desk job, then early retirement. But the truth, I left because I knew I wasn't ready to sit across from that man again. I heard about his trial, his arrest, his sentence, his health. I read that he died in 1984. Peacefully, at home, and I didn't believe a word of it. Because men like Raymond don't die peacefully. They die with 1,000 debts still unpaid, and a city that keeps whispering their name long after the papers stop printing it. I don't know why I'm writing this now. Maybe because I'm old, maybe because I'm tired, maybe because the kids joining the Bureau today think the job's about code and taps and press releases. But it's not. Sometimes the job is just surviving a conversation with a man who sees through your badge and into your spine. And Raymond? He was that man. He wasn't just a gangster, he was gravity. They say he never ordered a hit directly, never pulled a trigger, never raised his voice. But I'll tell you what he did do. He made men disappear without standing up from his chair. He built an empire out of silence. And when that silence cracked, the empire crumbled. Because none of the men who came after him understood what he carried. I still dream about that office, still smell the stale coffee, still feel the weight of his stare. Sometimes, in the quiet, I think I hear his voice. Lie slow, agent. And I wake up with a dry mouth and a bad heart, wondering if I ever left that room at all end of memo filed, closed case, historical reference. Only authorized for declassification per Directive 001-97. There's a bar on Dean Street, tucked between a boarded-up shoe shop and a closed-down dry cleaner. No name on the front, just a faded wooden door with a rusted handle and a brass bell that barely rings anymore. Most people walk right past it. Younger crowds don't even know it's a bar. The sidewalk out front's cracked. The windows are too dusty to see through. The lights inside flicker like they're just waiting for an excuse to die. But for the right kind of man, the kind with long memory and short words, that bar used to mean something. Still does. Because once, a long time ago, Raymond Patriarca sat in the back booth and drank from a chipped glass like he owned the oxygen in the room. And the man who poured that drink, he's still here. His name's Lou. No last name needed. Just Lou. He's 83 now. Moves like wet wood, slow and stiff, but his hands, steady. Still knows how to pour 2 fingers without spilling a drop. Still knows how to stack cash under a glass so it doesn't clink. He doesn't talk much, unless it matters. He doesn't tell stories, unless he's had 3 bourbons and a song from 1962 comes on the jukebox. But once in a while, on the right night, he'll talk about Raymond. Not loud, not long, but just enough to remind you that memory doesn't fade. It just settles into the bones. I wasn't a maid guy, Lou says one night, polishing the counter like it matters. Never took an oath, never did collections. I just poured drinks. That's it. He says it like an apology, like a man denying a rumor no one ever accused him of. But his eyes, they say more. They say he saw things, the kind of things that don't go in newspapers or case files. He first met Raymond in the spring of '56. Lou was 24, fresh out of the Navy, needed work. A cousin got him a job bartending at a place called The Bell. Line, just a corner bar back then. Cheap beer, cheaper talk. Raymond came in on a Thursday, alone, no entourage. Sat at the back, asked for bourbon, neat. Lou poured it. Raymond nodded, said, thanks. Didn't speak again for half an hour. Didn't need to. The room changed, Lou says, eyes glassing over. Not because he did anything. He didn't. He just was. From then on, Raymond came in once a week. Always alone. Always the same drink. Sometimes he read the paper. Sometimes he just stared at the wall like he was listening to something only he could hear. Other men would come in, but they never sat near him, never spoke first, never laughed too loud. They didn't fear him like a boss. They feared him like a judge, the kind that doesn't need a gavel or a robe, just a glance. Lou never asked questions. That's why Raymond liked him. Never tried to chat, never leaned in, never made him feel like he owed the bar anything. He just poured the bourbon, wiped the counter, and let the room breathe. And Raymond always paid in cash, never a tab, never asked for change. I saw things, Lou says once, barely above a whisper. Things I'll never repeat. Things that never had words, just nods and looks and silences that felt like storms. He remembers one night in '61, a man came in, drunk, didn't recognize Raymond, started mouthing off, loud, sloppy, disrespectful. Raymond didn't say a thing, didn't even look up, but one of his guys stepped outside, made a call. 15 minutes later, a car pulled up. The drunk was escorted out, calm, quiet. They didn't beat him in the bar, didn't cause a scene. But the next week, that man was gone, moved, vanished, never heard from again. Lou didn't ask where, didn't need to. I knew the code, Lou says, not because I was part of it, but because I understood it. He wipes the counter, even though it's already clean. You don't ask, you don't repeat, you don't ever speak a name unless you want to bury it. The years passed. Raymond got older, came in less often. Sometimes he looked tired, sometimes sharp, but never weak. Even in '77, after his health started failing, he showed up, same table, same drink. Lou noticed the way he gripped the edge of the booth when he stood, the slight tremble in his hand. But he never said a word, just poured the bourbon. Raymond nodded. The last time Lou saw him was in early '84. It was raining. The kind of rain that sticks to your coat and makes the whole world smell like ash. Raymond came in, didn't speak, sat in the booth. Lou poured the drink. Raymond took one sip, then just sat there, staring. 30 minutes passed, maybe more. Then he stood, walked over to the bar, put down a $50 bill, way more than usual. He looked at Lou and said, "You're the only man in this city who ever looked me in the eye and didn't want anything." Lou just nodded, didn't say thanks, didn't smile. Raymond walked out. 3 weeks later, he was dead. I didn't go to the funeral, Lou admits. Didn't feel right. He stares at the door like he expects it to open any minute. But I lit a candle. Not in a church. In here, on the bar. 1-shot glass of bourbon, 1 match, and no words. After Raymond died, the bar changed. Not suddenly. Slowly. Guys got louder, younger, dumber. Started talking like the life was a game, like the old days were just stories. One night, some punk said Raymond was overrated. Lou tossed him out, didn't raise his voice, just grabbed him by the collar and walked him to the door. Didn't matter that the kid was half his age. "You don't say his name like that," Lou said. "You don't say it at all." Now the bar is mostly empty. A few old men, a few quiet drinkers, no more secrets, no more nods. But Lou still keeps Raymond's booth untouched. Same chipped glass, same bourbon brand on the back shelf, even though no one else drinks it. Every Thursday, he pours a shot, sets it on the table, leaves it for an hour, then pours it out in the sink. Never speaks during that hour, because ghosts don't like noise. Sometimes the younger bartenders ask why he keeps that routine. He doesn't answer, because it's not a tribute, not a tradition. It's a promise, a quiet oath that some men keep, even when there's no one left to remember why. Lou doesn't fear death. He fears forgetting. Because once men like Raymond are forgotten, the world becomes all noise. And Lou was raised in silence. He says one last thing before closing up that night, his hand on the light switch, the jukebox humming something sad. The city used to whisper. Now it screams. That's how you know he's really gone. The lights go off. And Raymond's drink? It's still there, untouched, waiting. The year was 1950. The war was over. The country was growing. Men were building homes, chasing paychecks, having babies. And in the middle of it all, Raymond Patriarca sat in a church pew, half lit by stained glass, listening to a priest talk about redemption like it was still on the shelf, like it hadn't already been sold to the highest bidder. He wasn't there to pray. He wasn't there for guilt. He was there because he was tired. He had just buried Leo Trovato, one of his oldest soldiers, loyal to the bone. A quiet man, no vices, no women on the side. The kind of guy Raymond liked. Leo had taken a shotgun blast to the face 2 days earlier, outside a warehouse in Pawtucket, meant for someone else. Wrong place, wrong time. That's how it goes when you're building something dangerous. Innocent men pay for other people's sins. Raymond sat in that pew and stared at the crucifix above the altar like he was reading the fine print. He didn't cry. He didn't shake. But inside, A question sat like a loaded gun. What if this is the wrong road? He'd been working in the shadows since the early 30s. First for others, then for himself. Numbers, loans, hijackings, nothing flashy, nothing loud. Always controlled, always clean. At least, his kind of clean. But lately, things were changing. The guys around him were getting sloppy. New faces were showing up. Hungry kids, greedy men. Too much ambition, not enough patience. Raymond didn't like noise, and Providence was getting loud. At that time, Raymond wasn't yet the boss of New England. He was respected, feared, known, but he hadn't made his move. He could have still walked away. He had money, he had businesses, a quiet place in Lincoln, a woman who asked no questions, a routine that didn't yet demand blood every other week. He had enough. And that day in the church, for the first time in his adult life, he thought about walking. There was a man in California, old acquaintance from the war days, who offered Raymond a stake in a produce shipping outfit. Legit, real permits. Union connected. He told Raymond, "You put in 50, I give you 30 back a year. No cops, no bullets, just fruit." Raymond didn't laugh. He actually considered it. He thought about waking up without names in his head, without bodies to clean up, without judges to pay, without that gnawing paranoia that someone, somewhere, was whispering his name to someone else. That week, he stayed in his Lincoln house longer than usual. Took walks, drank wine on the back porch, listened to jazz on the radio, and read a book that didn't mention death. For a minute, just a breath of a minute, Raymond imagined a different life. But the streets don't like imagination. They like action, blood, loyalty, and most of all, decisions. The decision came one night, late, cold. He got a call, not on the main line, not on the one he used for business. This was his personal line, the one only 3 people knew. It was Paulie Delano, one of his closest guys, voice shaking, words broken. "It's Vito." They hit Vito. They hit him bad. Raymond didn't ask where. He just said, "Is he breathing?" Paulie said no, and that was it. Vito Bertucci was like a brother, not by blood, but blood was cheaper than what they'd shared. They'd come up together in Worcester, worked numbers out of meat trucks, fought Irish crews, broke jaws, made deals, buried secrets. Vito was never disloyal, never took a dollar he didn't earn, never questioned Raymond's orders, even when it meant fire and steel. They found him in a gravel pit in Johnston, face caved in, shot in the stomach, tortured, left to bleed out. Who did it? That wasn't the question. Raymond knew. It was Carlo Benedetti, an upstart from Boston, pushed into Providence without permission, started squeezing small bookmakers for territory. Vito had warned him, told him Providence wasn't open, told him to back off. Carlo didn't listen, and Vito, always loyal, didn't wait for orders, tried to reason with him, tried to hold the line. And they killed him for it. Raymond stood over Vito's body in a private funeral home, eyes locked on what was left of the man's face. Paulie stood behind him, silent, waiting. Finally, Raymond turned, and what he said changed the future of New England. "Get the books. I'm taking the whole fucking state." That was it. The exit was gone. The fruit business in California, dead in the water, the back porch and jazz and quiet dinners burned. Because Vito's body had spoken louder than the priest, the rain, or the voices in Raymond's own head. 2 weeks later, Carlo Benedetti was dead, not shot, erased, no body, no blood trail, just gone. Raymond never claimed it, never even mentioned his name again, but the message was clear, and every capo in Boston, Hartford, and Worcester understood. The lion was awake. Raymond moved fast after that, sat down with the old Providence crews, not with threats, with structure, order, control. He didn't beg, didn't boast. He said, "You work under me. You eat. You steal from me. You starve. You talk. You vanish." Some resisted. They weren't heard from again. Most fell in line, grateful in their own way. Because with Raymond came peace. A violent kind of peace, sure, but peace. By the summer of 1951, the Patriarca name meant more than just a man. It meant system, fear, balance. And Raymond, he never looked back, never spoke of California, never spoke of the porch, never asked for peace again. Because peace cost Vito his life, and Raymond wouldn't pay that price twice. He ruled for over 30 years after that, quietly, efficiently, without apology. But if you ever looked close, in rare moments when the crowd was gone, when the night was long and the bourbon sat untouched, you could still see something behind his eyes. Not regret, not guilt, just a door. A door he almost walked through. And some nights, maybe he still stood in front of it, just for a second, before turning away. His name was Michael Bruno, though no one called him Michael. They called him Bruno, or just Mick when he was younger. He grew up in Federal Hill, the kind of place where you learn to keep your hands in your pockets and your mouth shut before you learn to write your name in cursive. By 18, he already knew how to collect a debt with words and a stare. By 23, he'd broken 3 noses and 2 fingers, always for someone else, always for the right people. That's how he ended up sitting in the back of a parked car on Atwells Avenue in the winter of 1972, waiting to be called into Raymond Patriarca's office. It was a cold day. Gray sky, no snow, but the kind of air that made you feel like your lungs were chewing ice. Bruno sat still, hands on his thighs. He didn't fidget, didn't light a smoke. He was raised right. And he knew better than to walk in smelling like camels when the Don of New England called your name. He wasn't nervous. Not exactly. But he knew this. It wasn't just a chat. You didn't get summoned by Raymond himself for small talk. The door opened, and one of Raymond's older guys, Paulie, gave him the nod. Bruno stepped out, boots crunching against the frozen sidewalk. He walked through the door, past the squeaky bell, into that gray office everyone whispered about. He'd seen it once, years ago, when delivering a cash envelope for a friend. But this time, he was the one sitting in the chair. And Raymond? Raymond sat there like he'd always been there, like time didn't touch him. Plain suit, thin tie, ledger on the desk, half-drunk coffee next to a snub-nosed revolver that never moved, never needed to. He didn't greet Bruno, just said, "You know the Santini kid?" Bruno nodded once. "Dino." Raymond tilted his head. "I don't do nicknames." "He's a thief. That's his name now." Bruno swallowed. Dino Santini had been seen skimming from a numbers operation in Johnston. Worse, he was running his mouth in a bar about how Raymond was too old to know what's his. Bruno didn't believe it at first. You don't talk about Raymond like that. Not in Providence, not if you have plans to breathe next week. But the story got confirmed, twice, quietly. Now here he was, sitting across from the man himself. Raymond leaned forward. "He's not just a thief. He's a loud thief. That's 2 sins." He slid a folded slip of paper across the desk. "You're going to remind him why silence is holy." Bruno looked at the slip. An address, no names. He didn't need more. He stood, nodded once, and turned. Raymond didn't say good luck, didn't say make it clean. He just spoke once more before Bruno reached the door. "Do it quiet, or don't come back." Bruno didn't sleep that night, not from fear, not even guilt. It was clarity that kept him awake. He'd just been handed his first hit. Not an alley beating, not a warning, a message written in blood, and it had to be done under Raymond's name, the kind of job that lived longer than the body. The next evening, Bruno parked across from a run-down 3-flat in North Providence. Dino's place, lights on upstairs, a radio playing something soft, jazz maybe. Bruno didn't rush. He waited, watched, learned the rhythm of the house. That's what Vince, one of the old guys, had taught him. Anyone can shoot. A man watches first, learns how the house breathes. At 9:46 p.m., the back light went off. Dino was winding down. Bruno moved. He went through the alley, gloved hands in his pockets, picked the back lock like he'd done a dozen times, stepped into the dark kitchen, quiet as snow. The apartment was silent. One dim lamp in the living room, couch, ashtray, half-empty bottle of vodka on the table. Bruno could smell it. Sweat, smoke, bad decisions. He moved slow, down the hall. Door cracked open. Dino was asleep, shirt off, one leg dangling off the mattress. Bruno pulled the .22 from his coat. Small, close range, whisper loud. He stepped into the room, leveled the gun, paused. Dino stirred, eyes half open. Bruno, like it was a dream. Bruno didn't answer. He aimed for the eye, pulled the trigger. Click, nothing. Gun jammed. Dino blinked, sat up. Jesus. What the Bruno moved fast, swung the butt of the gun into Dino's face, cracked his cheekbone. Dino screamed. Bruno tackled him to the bed, struggled to keep the gun up. Dino clawed, grabbed his arm, screamed again. "You don't have to do this, man. You don't have to." That's when Bruno snapped. He shoved the gun into Dino's mouth, pulled the trigger. This time it didn't jam. The silence after was louder than the shot. Blood soaked the pillow. Dino's body twitched once, then nothing. Bruno stood over him, chest heaving, sweat on his back, hands shaking. He stared down at the man he used to drink with, used to play cards with. Now he was just meat, just a message. Bruno cleaned up, wiped down the room, took the shell casing, left no prints. He walked out the back door like a ghost, the night swallowing him whole. 2 hours later, he was back in his apartment. He didn't sleep, didn't shower. Just sat in a chair by the window, gun on the table, watching the sky turn from black to gray. The next day, he walked back into Raymond's office. Didn't say a word. Raymond didn't look up right away, just finished writing in the ledger. Then finally, did he learn? Bruno nodded once. Raymond sipped his coffee. Good. You'll get a call next week. Bruno turned to leave, but before he reached the door, Raymond said, "You hesitated." Bruno froze. Not fear, just confusion. "I didn't." "You did," Raymond said flatly. "But you did it anyway." "That matters." He finally looked up, met Bruno's eyes. "One hesitation, I forgive. 2, you vanish." Bruno nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." Raymond waved him off. Bruno left. He didn't cry, didn't drink, didn't talk to anyone. But something in him was different after that night. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't even a man. He was a message that could walk. That hit stayed with him for the rest of his life. Not because it was bloody, not because it was personal, but because it was his first and last chance to prove he understood the world Raymond built, where silence wasn't just survival. It was the only thing that made life worth surviving. By the time Bruno turned 63, the city had long stopped calling his name. No more pickups, no more sit-downs, no more late-night knocks on the door asking for favors that came with blood on the back end. He'd faded from Providence like smoke from a match. On purpose. His body ached more than it used to, especially in the knees. Too many years crouched behind fences, waiting. Too many winter nights watching doorways that never opened. He still kept a small apartment in Smith Hill, 2nd floor. Cheap rent. No TV, no visitors. Just a rotary phone that hadn't rung in 3 years and a small safe with 3 things inside. 1, a roll of cash. 2, a photo of his mother from 1947. 3, a small revolver with 2 bullets, both oiled and cleaned every Sunday morning. He didn't consider himself retired. He considered himself done. Raymond had died. Jerry was dead. Vince, Dom, even Paulie, all gone. And the new generation, they didn't care. They talked big, used phones, shot people over disrespect instead of money. Bruno watched them from the corner of bars like a ghost. They never saw him, and if they did, they didn't recognize him. The ones who remembered, the old men with soft hands and tired eyes, nodded at him across rooms. but no one approached, because Bruno was from a time where silence meant survival, and the silence had only gotten louder in his head. It was a Thursday night in early December when his past came calling. He'd just finished sweeping the floor. He still kept the place clean, even though no one visited. He liked order, liked the way dust disappeared under a broom like it was never there. The knock came soft, 3 times, spaced, like the old knock, a pattern. He froze, not out of fear, out of recognition. That was the way Polly used to knock. That was the code. Bruno stepped to the door, looked through the peephole. There was a man there, mid-40s, leather jacket, tight face, scar across his chin. Bruno didn't know him, but the man said 2 words. For Vince. And Bruno opened the door. The man's name was Joey Pirelli. He said he worked construction. Union side. Said he knew Vince Sarno before he died. Bruno didn't speak, just listened. Joey sat at the kitchen table like he was sitting in a church. Respect in his posture, fear in his eyes. There's a kid, Mr. Bruno. He's using Vince's name, running collections out of Cranston, saying he's connected. He's not. Bruno said nothing. He's loud, real loud. He's telling people Vince made him, says he's got old ties, that you signed off. Bruno's jaw tightened. He's threatening guys who can't fight back, beating small shopkeepers, running protection scams, even said Raymond's crew was backing him from New York. That's when Bruno stood, walked to the cupboard, pulled down a small bottle of bourbon, 2 glasses, poured 1, drank. Joey didn't touch his. Why come to me? Bruno finally asked. Joey took a breath. Because someone has to protect the name, and there ain't nobody left but you. Bruno didn't answer. He walked to the window, looked out at the street. Cars passed, people moved, life continued. But this wasn't about life. This was about memory. That night, Bruno sat in the dark, gun in front of him, photo of Vince beside it. He remembered when Vince taught him how to use a knife without getting blood on his cuffs, how to leave a room without anyone knowing. You'd ever been there, but more than that, Vince had taught him the importance of restraint. We don't hit for pride, Vince had said. We hit when it keeps the walls from falling down. Bruno hadn't touched a trigger in 19 years, but the idea of someone spitting on Vince's name, Raymond's code, it didn't sit right. And some things don't fade with age. Some things calcify. The next day, Bruno walked into a bar in Cranston called the Rust Tap. The kid was already there. He had the booth near the jukebox, legs stretched, shirt open too far, chains too bright. Name was Nick Santino. Bruno had never heard of him, but his face told the story. The kind of face that knew no discipline, no loss, and no fear worth keeping. Bruno walked in, sat at the bar, ordered coffee, waited, watched. The kid laughed, loud, hit the waitress on the ass, louder. And when a quiet man in a sweater vest asked him if he could turn the music down, Santino said, "Sit down before I turn you into soup." Bruno stood, walked to the table, looked the kid in the eye. "Let's talk." The kid didn't recognize him, which was the first mistake. "Who the are you?" Bruno didn't answer. He slid into the booth, leaning forward, voice like sandpaper. "You don't say Vince's name again. You don't say Raymond's name again. You don't run scams under ghosts you ain't earned." The kid smirked. "What are you, his uncle?" Bruno pulled the revolver from his coat, set it on the table, soft, deliberate. The kid stopped smirking. Bruno leaned in again. "You got 48 hours to disappear. No money, no goodbye, no more noise." Santino's hand moved under the table. Bruno was faster, not a twitch, not a flinch, just cold steel to the kid's thigh. "One more move and you'll need a cane to walk out." Silence, real silence, the kind that Raymond used to wear like a second skin. Bruno stood, picked up the revolver. "If you're still in this city by Sunday, you'll disappear." For real, he walked out, The kid left town the next night. No fireworks, no speeches, just gone. Word spread. Not fast as but enough, just a whisper. Bruno's still watching. That was all it took. No bodies, no headlines, just one last message, delivered the old way. A week later, Bruno lit a candle in the church Vince used to visit on Charles Street. He didn't pray, just sat, watched the flame dance. He wasn't holy, but he understood reverence. He wasn't young, but he still had purpose. He wasn't loud, but he still spoke when it mattered. Some men die with legacy, others die with silence. Bruno? He was the last of a third kind, the ones who carry it, until it's safe to let go. If you asked Raymond Patriarca what loyalty meant, he wouldn't give you a speech. He wouldn't explain it with hand gestures or stories from the old days. He'd just point to a chair in his office, the one across from his desk, and say, "If I let, you sit there and leave alive. That's loyalty. That's trust. No threats, no poetry." Because in Raymond's world, you didn't betray a man like him and wake up the next day. That's why when it finally happened, when someone broke the one rule he never bent, it didn't come from the outside. It came from his own blood. His son, Raymond Jr. They weren't close in the way people think fathers and sons should be. Raymond Sr. didn't take his boy to ball games or teach him how to fish. He taught him something colder, more useful. A man's worth is in what he walks away from, not what he holds on to. Junior was soft from the start. Not weak, just different. He liked the attention, liked the cars, the suits, the idea of power without the discipline that made it real. Raymond saw it early, didn't say much. But in 1965, when Junior was 23, Raymond gave him a small crew to test him. Simple work, collections, numbers, nothing heavy. Junior ran it for 3 years, and on the surface, it worked. Money came in, books balanced, no heat, but Raymond could feel it in his gut, that quiet itch that something underneath wasn't right. In 1969, a whisper reached Raymond's ear. A federal wiretap had picked up his son's name, linked to a side deal in Worcester, unapproved loans, dirty cash being skimmed, small amounts, but steady. Raymond didn't react immediately. He waited, watched, confirmed, and when it was clear, he called his son into the office. Junior showed up late, wore a leather coat, too much cologne, smiled like the meeting was a formality. Raymond didn't smile. He didn't speak at first, just pushed a folded ledger across the desk. Junior looked at it, didn't touch it. "You had me followed?" Raymond looked at him for a long time. "No, I had you weighed." Junior scoffed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I hoped you were heavier than this." That's all. The silence that followed was not the kind that passed. It stayed in the room, thick and permanent. Raymond could have killed him. No one would have questioned it. Not Paulie, not Vince, not the 5 families. The code was clear. But instead, Raymond did something no one expected. He stripped his son of his crew, cut him off from all business, banned his name from the books, but he let him live. And that mercy, that was the real mistake. Junior didn't go quietly. He didn't walk away. He got bitter, started drinking more, started talking. In 1972, he was arrested in a small sting, drug-related, though Raymond had forbidden narcotics under his name. He beat the case, slippery lawyers, weak evidence, but the damage wasn't legal. It was personal, because that arrest brought heat back to Raymond's doorstep. And it reopened a door Raymond had nailed shut. Family. For years after, Junior stayed on the fringe, black sheep of the family, still used the name, still lived off the scraps of respect he hadn't earned. Raymond ignored him, didn't speak of him, didn't acknowledge him at meetings. But inside, he carried the weight of it, the weight of having failed to raise silence. In 1978, Junior crossed the final line. He was caught, Not by cops, but by Raymond's own men, trying to broker a side deal with a Boston crew, an alliance, something outside the Providence structure. He told them it was a way forward, that the old ways were dying. He said out loud in a bar full of ears, "My father's half dead, and his rules are buried with him." The next morning, Raymond summoned Vince, didn't raise his voice, didn't shout, just sat behind the desk with his hand resting on a cold cup of coffee. He said, "I was half dead." Vince didn't answer. He's wrong. A long pause, then the words that changed everything. "But if he says one more word, I'll let the world think I'm all the way gone. He'll vanish." Vince understood. This was no longer about blood, it was about the name. Junior was warned, one time, quietly, face to face. Vince met him in a parking garage, no one else around. Told him, "He gave you life twice. Don't ask for a third." Junior didn't listen. He laughed. "He's old. He won't touch me. He's all smoke now." That laugh echoed in Raymond's mind for days, not because it was funny, but because it confirmed what he already knew. His son didn't fear him, and a man who's not afraid is a man who can destroy you, not with bullets, with disgrace. 2 weeks later, Junior left Providence. Voluntarily, they said, moved to Miami, started a clean business, real estate, but the timing? Too neat, too precise. Vince handled it, no blood, no bullet, just a closed door and a whisper. "Your father says you're already dead. He's letting you walk anyway. That's his gift." Junior didn't argue. He boarded the flight, and Raymond never said his name again. He didn't mourn, didn't speak of it to anyone, not even in his last years. But Lou, the old bartender, said one night that he caught Raymond alone at the bar, late, drinking quietly. And Lou heard him whisper, "I raised a name, not a man." Then he left the drink unfinished. That was the only time he ever heard regret in Raymond's voice. Raymond believed in control, in order, in rules, but no code could protect you from blood that goes rotten. And in that betrayal, quiet, slow, from within, he lost something he never got back. Not his name, not his power, but the belief that anything, even family, could be trusted to carry the silence forward. Junior died in 1999. Heart failure, no fanfare. They buried him in Florida. He was survived by a business partner, a girlfriend, and a reputation that had turned into nothing but noise. No one from Providence went to the funeral. No one called to ask. Because once you walk away from the code, once you spit on it, your grave goes unmarked in the hearts of real men. They found the wire by accident. It was 1987, 3 years after Raymond died. An ATF agent named Curtis was going through evidence boxes from a cold case, mob-related arsons in Providence. Buried inside one of the cardboard files marked unconfirmed audio, he found a cassette. No label, no transcript, just a timestamp, June 4th, 1984, 12 days before Raymond Patriarca died. Curtis wasn't even looking for Raymond, but curiosity got the better of him. He slid the tape into a government-issued player, pressed play. At first, nothing but static. Then, voices, 2 of them, one calm, slow, slight rasp, the other nervous, younger, trying not to interrupt. And Curtis knew within 10 seconds he was listening to Raymond. The tape ran for 22 minutes. What follows is a reconstructed transcription, cleaned, filtered, and confirmed by 2 surviving FBI linguists. This conversation was never entered into the official record. It was never played in court. It was never meant to be found. But in these final words, the myth of Raymond falls away. And what's left is a man preparing to leave everything behind in the only way he knew how, quietly. Begin transcript. Raymond, you see the rain out there? Unknown male. Yeah, streets are flooding. Raymond, streets always flood. Cities built on bad concrete, that's the problem. Everybody wants to build tall, but no one wants to pour the foundation right. Unknown male. I hear that, Raymond. No, you don't. Not yet. You will. Pause. Raymond, what's the status? Unknown. Male, numbers are steady. Jimmy from Cranston brought in the envelope yesterday. Clean count. The Lowell guys are getting sloppy again, using phones, even talking to girls about drops. You want me to say something? Raymond. No. Unknown male. You sure? Raymond. If I gotta say it again, they're already gone. Let them fall on their own knife. Just make sure it's their knife and not mine. Chair creaks, papers shuffle. Raymond, you know what I was thinking about last night? Unknown male. What's that? Raymond. My father. He worked 14 hours a day making shoes in a basement. No windows, dirt floors. Come home with leather dust in his lungs. Didn't complain once. Unknown male. He was a tough man. Raymond. No, he was scared. Every day. Scared he'd fail, that he'd be forgotten, that his wife would leave, that I'd grow up weak. Unknown. Male. You're not weak, Raymond. No, but he didn't know that, and I never told him he did good. Not once. I wonder what he'd say if he saw this office. Brief silence. Unknown. Male. He'd be proud, Raymond. Proud doesn't mean anything. Not if they don't understand the cost. Papers shuffle. Raymond. You know what this ledger is? Unknown. Male. Your books? Raymond. No, this is a list of sins I paid for so nobody else had to. Glass clinks. Raymond. Every name in here, someone I protected, someone I cleaned up after, buried their mess, fed their families, sent money to their mothers. Unknown male. That's why they respect you, Raymond. Respect is fear with manners, nothing more. The second the fear goes, the manners go with it. Unknown male, then you've still got it. The city still breathes your name. Raymond, the city's dying, son. Brief pause. Unknown. Male. What do you mean? Raymond. Look around. You see discipline? You see rules? I see kids with pistols trying to act like bosses. I see guys using the name like it's a discount card. I built this house with bricks. They're turning it into a bonfire. Unknown male. So we stopped them, Raymond. No, you let fire burn what's meant to burn. Unknown male. You're not giving up, Raymond. I gave up a long time ago. You just didn't notice because I still came to work. Unknown male. So what now? Raymond. Now we prepare the last page. Make sure the books close clean. No open cuts. No names hanging loose. Unknown male. You think the feds will ever crack it? Raymond. Not the feds, I fear. It's the traitors wearing my suits. Unknown. Male. You think they'll come from inside? Raymond. They always do. Long pause. Raymond. I saw him again, you know. Unknown. Male. Who? Raymond. Junior. Unknown. Male. Where? Raymond. Doesn't matter. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. That's what hurt. Not that he left. Not that he lied. That he forgot. Unknown. Male. He chose a different road. Raymond. He chose to bury my name in dirt. Chair creaks. Raymond. That's what I get for showing mercy. I have killed men for less than what he did. But I let him walk. Thought it was strength. Thought it was love. Pause. Raymond. Weakness. That's what it was. Unknown male. You're not weak, Ray. Raymond. No, not anymore. That part of me died the day I let him go. I've only been managing the damage since. Glasses clink again. Raymond. Do you know what silence really is? Unknown male. Control? Raymond. No, it's the absence of regret, that's all. If you can sit in a room like this and hear nothing but your own breath and not flinch, you've done life right. Unknown male. You ever flinch? A beat of silence. Raymond. Every day, but I don't let anyone see it. Tape crackles. Footsteps heard. Raymond. You're gonna run things for me. Unknown male. Me? Raymond. Yeah, you. Don't say no. I've already written it. Unknown male. I don't know if I'm. Raymond. Doesn't matter what you are now. What matters is what you carry. Unknown male. And what's that? Raymond. My silence. My ledger. My last page. Unknown. Male. I won't fail you. Raymond. You will, but I won't be here to see it. Laughter, brief, dry, ends quickly. Oh, Raymond, just remember, when you're faced with a choice between power and peace, choose peace and then bury it deep, because power always comes looking. End transcript. The tape ends there. No grand sign-off, no confession. Just the click of a chair and Raymond's final breath into the room he'd ruled for decades. The Bureau never released the tape. Too intimate, too human. It wasn't evidence, it was testament. Proof that even kings die quietly, that even empires collapse with no sound. But for those who knew the name, for the men who lived under it, that conversation said more than any trial ever could. It showed that Raymond knew it was ending. And he wasn't angry, he wasn't scared. He was ready. Because silence wasn't just his weapon, it was his exit plan. And he left the room the same way he entered it, with nothing but the sound of his own breath and a world too loud to keep up with him. He sat by the window, staring out at nothing. The sky was the color of old paper, and the wind made the tree branches twitch like nervous hands. Robert Ellis hadn't been an agent in almost 20 years, but his instincts, those sharp edges carved from decades of wiretaps, stakeouts, and courtroom whispers, still lived inside him like splinters. He was 79 now, thinner than he used to be. The bulletproof frame of his 30s had softened into something smaller, something slower. But in his head, the voices never stopped. Every day before the nurse came, he'd reach under the couch cushion and pull out the old recorder. Not the digital kind, the cassette player. Black plastic, scratched, dented, heavy with memory. Inside it, a copy of the tape, the one they found in '87. The final conversation between Raymond Patriarca and his last trusted man. Ellis had listened to it hundreds of times. He didn't know why he kept playing it. There was no evidence in it, no confessions, nothing actionable. But there was something real in that voice. Something that had outlived the arrests, the surveillance vans, the failed indictments. He hadn't cried when his wife died, hadn't even cried when the doctor told him about the cancer, said it had started in the lungs and made its way into the bones like a quiet thief. When he heard Raymond say, "If I let you sit there and leave alive, that's loyalty." Ellis had to turn the recorder off, because even after all these years, it still made his hands shake. He first met Raymond in person in 1962, across a courtroom in Boston. Wire fraud, interstate racketeering. The case collapsed within weeks. The judge had a medical emergency. 2 key witnesses disappeared. One had a fishing accident. Ellis had been a young, hungry agent, fresh from Quantico. He thought the badge was power. Raymond taught him otherwise. For the next 15 years, Ellis made Raymond his obsession. He read every file, sat in every surveillance van, listened to every tape, no matter how muffled, how boring, how silent. And that was the thing. So many of Raymond's tapes were silent. He didn't talk. He listened. He gave orders without speaking. He ran the entire underworld of New England with gestures, looks, timing, and that drove Ellis mad. If he'd just say one word, he used to tell his partner, we'd have him. But Raymond never gave them that word. And that silence, that damn silence, was what Ellis respected most. In 1975, the Bureau gave up. They pivoted to Boston. Easier targets, no legacy. Raymond was too disciplined, they said, too insulated, too careful, a waste of manpower. Ellis disagreed. "He's old, not gone," he said. "He'll make a mistake." But he never did, not once. Raymond died in 1984. Ellis was in New York at the time, working a union corruption case. When the call came through the wire that Raymond Patriarca was dead, Ellis didn't believe it. He drove back to Providence the next day, went to the church where they held the funeral, didn't go in, just stood across the street watching the black cars roll by like mourning soldiers, There was no public spectacle, no shootout, no drama, just a quiet burial, just shadows standing under umbrellas. Raymond would have liked that. For years after, Ellis kept the old case files in a locked drawer, even after he retired, even after the cancer. He told his kids it was just old paperwork. But every now and then, at 2 a.m., when the house was dead and the pain in his spine reminded him the end was near, he'd open those files and run his hand across the names. Paulie, Vince, Bruno, ghosts, all ghosts now. But none of them haunted him like Raymond. The nurse came every morning at 9. Nice girl, quiet, didn't ask questions. One day she found Ellis asleep in the chair, the recorder still running. She asked him what was on the tape. He told her, "A man preparing to die without blinking." She asked who he was. He said, "A better man than I gave him credit for." It took him a long time to admit it, even to himself. But Ellis hadn't hated Raymond. He'd admired him, not for the blood, not for the crime, but for the control, the discipline, the way he held together a criminal empire with nothing but fear, respect, and a voice that rarely rose above a whisper. Raymond had something Ellis never did. Silence that meant something. One day, Ellis wrote a letter. No address, no name on the envelope, just a confession, a final one. He wrote, "You were the enemy, but you never flinched. You never begged. You never ran. And in the end, I think that scared me more than anything else. I spent my whole life trying to put you in a box, and you walked into one without a word. I don't know if men like you go to heaven or hell. I just know the world got louder the day you left." He burned the letter in the kitchen sink, watched the smoke rise, didn't feel proud, didn't feel weak, just felt finished. On his last night, Ellis fell asleep listening to the tape again, and in the morning, when the nurse found him, the cassette had clicked to the end. Nothing but soft looping static, white noise, just like Raymond would have wanted. In the bureau, they still whisper about the tape, still wonder who the unknown male was, still argue about Raymond's true body count. But Ellis knew the truth. The numbers never mattered. The stories didn't either. What mattered, what always mattered, was that Raymond left this world the same way he ruled it, without noise, without weakness, without apology. And the men who knew him, even the ones who tried to destroy him, still hear that silence echo. In their bones, in their dreams, in the empty space he left behind. Raymond Patriarca died on July 11th, 1984. But his silence never left. It still walks Providence, still lingers in the corners of empty bars, still rides the rain down Atwell's Avenue, still flickers in the old office with the vending machines and gray walls, and maybe, just maybe, it always will.